Alright, we're going to continue Hilchos Basar בחלב, Siman Tzadik Dalet, Sif Zayin, where we left off from last time. Sif Zayin, both Mechaber and the Ramah, discuss a situation that can happen quite often. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but if it does, there are various shitas on how to deal with both the meat that was cut with the Melicha knife and the knife. There's several dinim here that need to be discussed. In Basar b'chalav in general, when we evaluate a situation, we must realize that it could be three items that we're evaluating: the spoon, the pot, the food in the pot, and they may actually have different dinim, all of the three of them. So this is one of those situations that can happen, of course by mistake, hopefully, not intentionally. And by the way, this could be, you know where this could easily happen? If you didn't explain well to your guests who are staying or using your home, your apartment, where the melichas and fleishiks are, and they decided to cut the meat that they were having for dinner with, by mistake, a melicha knife. So that's what the seif reads. So we're dealing with meat, hot meat. It's interesting that the Mechaber doesn't discuss cold meat, but we'll mention it later. The posek can talk about it. But what about Basar Deah, which is more problematic? Hot meat that was cut with a sakin cholevet, with a Melicha knife. Kol hachaticha asura. So the Mechaber says in this kind of a situation, the whole chaticha is asura, which is very interesting because in Taaruvot we came across situations where there was no cooking, no liquid really involved, a form of tzli, right, which is pretty hot. And the most we got to was natila, even though there is a way that it could be aser kula, and that is if it was mefa'apea. The din of piapu, of course, can make things differently. But here, from the Mechaber itself, we don't see piapua. All we hear is a sakin has a special din. Cutting a piece of meat with a knife is almost equivalent to cooking. And we explained that one reason is because there's something called duchka de sakina. It's the weight, the pushing of the knife. The knife is sharp, that allows the tam of balua in the knife to travel throughout the whole piece of meat. Kol hachaticha asura means that it traveled through the whole piece of meat. So the piece of meat would be asura. Im ein bashishim keneged makom asakin. If there's no 60 keneged the knife, he didn't tell us clearly here, but he does in the Beis Yosef. What does keneged makom asakin mean? How much of the knife? We'll talk about that too. But poshup shot is you need shishim keneged the blade, not the handle. Shechot hachabasa. Avalim eino ben yoima. He makes a distinction. If this knife would not be a ben yoima, or Yore Deah, you don't know if it's a ben yoima or not. Why are we so makel by something that you don't know if it's a ben yoima? Because tam kalim, you can use this leniency in evaluating situations. If you have any doubt about ben yoima, not ben yoima, you may assume it's not ben yoima, if you really don't know. And then, of course, then you're dealing with a kedei klipa only. So we have to also understand why do you need a klip at all if it's an eino ben yoima. So last time we explained that the mekor of this din is Rabbeinu Peretz, and the question here is how much of a blia will the sakin put into the meat? That was one question, and we said that there are going to be two chilukim. One is if it's a sakin ben yoima or eino ben yoima, and if there will be shishim. These are the two criteria that are going to make a difference regarding how much, if any, blia goes into this piece of meat. The Shach, in explaining this shita, asked legabe the balua that is mefapeh, apparently traveling throughout the whole chaticha. He said that obviously that's what's happening here. It's a form of piapua, but piapua usually does not happen unless there's roitav. You have to have liquid. Otherwise, how do you have something travel from the knife throughout the whole meat? If anything, he would ask kedei natila, like we saw by tzli. By tzli, you have kedei natila, without piapu even. So he gave us three terutzim. In the first teretz is where you find the concept duchka de sakina. The duchka de sakina here makes the whole difference, together with the heat. It's a combination of the two. Is that what what allows the tam of the sakin to travel throughout the meat. The second explanation in the shach was, since a sakin choleves usually has something fatty on it, like butter, because of that little fattiness in the sakin, it is able to go that far. So in the second and the third teretz, the third teretz being that the basar is the one that's fatty, we don't really find any sign of ducha de sakina anymore. So it's not so much the ducha de sakina as much as the fattiness either in the sakin or in the basar itself. These are the three terutzim. It's important to note, however, that Rabbi Kiva Eger brings down the Rashba, who writes B'Shem Aravid, and I'm almost sure he holds like him too, that in this kind of a situation, using a knife and cutting a piece of meat, the most it would aser is kedei netila. In other words, those shitas, Rishonim, do not hold that duchka de sakina is so powerful to make the tam travel throughout the whole chaticha. Based on what, the way we read, right? If they say that as far as the most it asks kedei netila, like by tzli, apparently they don't hold that there's such a thing, or that it makes that much of a difference. That duchka de sakina, even though duchka de sakina is a concept, it doesn't mean that it asers all the way through the whole thing. So that's an important shita to keep in mind. The Rashba holds like the Raavad, that it's not mavliya bekuloi. The Pri Chodosh, I think, brings down halacha l'maisa that that's all. In other words, not like the Mechaber. So you have quite a few shitas that would say, you know what? It does not become aser kuloi. It only asers kedei netila. All right, so what I thought would be interesting is to talk a little bit about, there's a shach here and there's a whole discussion in Tzadik Vov. Even though Tzadik Vov is a little bit further on, it's somewhat related to here. The shach goes through a whole discussion as to why, or what is the difference, if any, between duchka de sakina over here, that somehow asers the whole piece together with heat, and davar charif. You find that, he asks the question, duchka de sakina with a davar charif, with something spicy, it only goes as far as kedei netila. So here we see a combination of duchka de sakina with heat going throughout the whole chaticha and answering the whole chaticha, as opposed to duchka de sakina with a davar charif, an onion, a radish, or some other spicy foods, that it only goes kedei netila. In other words, that combination has an effect of only answering or taking the time as far as kedei netila. So what's the difference? And he says like this: there's a difference between davar cham and davar charif. Obviously, davar cham, when something is hot, together with duchka de sakina, the heat is what enables it together duchka de sakina to be mavliya bekula. He says obviously you have to say that. You have to say that heat is more powerful than spicy food. How else would you call an onion or a radish? They're not spicy. They're hot. They're sharp, right? So that their sharpness together with the sakin is just simply not strong enough, the Shach explains, to go beyond the netila. However, in the Gilyon Marsha, on the side over here, Gilyon Marsha does something very interesting. He tells you, okay, even though you're surprised here with heat and duchka de sakina is asers the kulo, I will find you two situations where davar charif together with duchka de sakina will be more powerful than the heat. In other words, you will find a chumrah in a davar charif, and it may not be a kind of heat. Here we're talking about the heat, basar reseach. So the Gilyon Marsha says, I can find you two chumras, two situations where a davar charif with duchka de sakina, or not necessarily duchka de sakina, but a davar charif will have more chumras than duchka de sakina and reseach, and heat. Not necessarily duchka de sakina, heat. Just heat. Davar charif could be more chumra than heat. These are the two situations that he says. I thought it was interesting, so I'm including it. If you cooked a maichol, a food, in a k'dera choleves, this maichol that you're cooking is a davar charif, that what you cooked will become melicheks. We'll talk about it later on when we get to davar charif, I believe. He just brings it down over here. All right? What did we say about cooking something in a melichek pot? not a davar charif, it's a nat bar nat. It doesn't really go anywhere. By Michael Chorif, it actually becomes Melichix. The Chorif itself is strong enough to cancel out the nat bar nat. Or if you cut something sharp, like an onion, with a Melichic knife, that which you cut became completely Melichic. So he explains like this. When it comes to be maflit the tam, when it comes to extracting the mamoshes of the tam in its full intensity, the davar charif has a maila over heat. Because davar charif is able to extract the whole tam. Masha'inkin by cham, heat, in the case of cooking, all it does is produce a nat bar nat, and nat bar nat is just not a strong tam, it's a tam kolush. Whereas davar charif has the ability to extract much more of the flavor. Now, later on he explains that there's an additional difference. This is an important difference. If you went ahead and cut with a knife that is not a ben yoimo, a davar cham, something hot, according to Rabbeinu Peretz, Shuchan Aruch, all you're going to need is a klipa. Because you have a little bit of shamnunis, perhaps, on the knife, a little bit of fat, and that shamnunis penetrates a klipa. But if you used a knife with a davar charif, even if it's eino ben yoimai, boy netila, you need a netila, so you need more than if you used a knife that's eino ben yoimai and a davar cham. So we see even in that kind of a situation, the davar charif goes beyond the davar cham. The Taz, however, explains that in reality, if you're dealing with eino ben yoimai, as we're going to see inside, you wouldn't even need a klipa either. Me'ikar adin, you don't need a klipa. Why? He says in the case where it travels throughout the whole piece, when it answers the whole thing, the whole idea of klipa is just a chumrah. In other words, in reality, we say with the heat and a sakin that is ben yomo, it goes everywhere. You don't even need a klipa. The klipa is only a chumrah. Why did they need a klipa? Because perhaps more of the tam of the knife is concentrated in the first layer. So all it is, the whole idea of klipa is a chumrah. Even in other words, whether it's a ben yoima or even an eino ben yoima, it's all it is a chumrah. By davar charif, the Taz explains, the whole idea of its koyach is that it can never be mavliya bekula. It only goes kedei netila. So in other words, it always has this limitation that it cannot go so far. So yes, it appears to you that a davar charif is more in a sense than a davar cham, but that's not exactly it. It's just that by the klipa by davar cham, we shouldn't get lost over there. It's only really an extra chumrah, ben yoima or even eino ben yoima. It's not the ikar adin. The ikar adin is that if it's a ben yoima, it answers the whole thing. So obviously you can't really compare the two, but I guess you could say, like the Gilui Maharsha says, that you do find some situations where there's more of a chumrah, perhaps. Yeah, but it's not that it's more powerful. Heat, it will always be more powerful than the davar charif. Yeah, but there are situations where obviously the heat will produce a nat by nat, and of course the nat by nat will not be a problem, whereas the davar charif may be something that we need to reckon with. Okay, so far what did we see in Siv Zayin in the Mechaber? We saw that if it's ben yoimoy, it answers the whole thing. But the Mechaber adds, if it's not ben yoimoy, or if you don't know, all you need is a klipa. Now, what happens, therefore, if it's a ben yoimoy and you do have shishim? Then everything should be mutar. So that's what appears from the Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch and from the Torah. That if you don't have shishim, then you have a problem. But if you do have shishim, what do we understand? That it's all mutar. if you learn the inside, if you see the Taz and the Shach, they say that regardless, even if you have Shishim, you need a Klippa. You hear, Ilan? Even if you have Shishim. And that's a very interesting point, and we see it later on too. There are situations where even if you have Shishim, you're going to have to take off a layer. There's this chashash of perhaps that's where it's more concentrated. When we say the Shishim, we're saying it went throughout the whole piece. Yeah, maybe it didn't. Maybe it's all concentrated in the beginning. Right.
That's provided it's precipitated in everything that's there.
We make that assumption many times.
Why is this so difficult?
Yeah. Here there's a chashash because of the nature of the way it is happening.
There's an absence of heat, and there's instead something.
No, there's both. There is heat also.
Yeah, but not,
It's not cooking in the water, right?
Right. So there's in the other case, and there's the pressure that.
Right. Therefore, in this kind of situation, in others, I don't recall each one of them right now, but there are other situations where the poskim, the achronim say, we're machmer, it's a chumrah, to require, in addition to the shishim, a klipa too.
Right.
That's not mashma for the mechaber here. And remember we spoke about this, what happens if you cooked it without taking off the klipa? There was a din. Did you need the klipa me'ikar adin, or was it just a chumrah? It can make a difference. If you now need shishim, you can get the klipa. But that's a separate issue. Here, the Shach and Taz, and others probably, I didn't check everyone out, but they at least here say that regardless of it's ben yomo or eino ben yomo, regardless of whether you have shishim or not, you're going to need a klipa anyway. Chochmas Sodom actually also says you need a klipa. The Pri Chodesh says all you need is natila, but it's interesting, the Pri Chodesh don't, it's easy to make a mistake. The Pri Chodesh says you never have a problem with shishim anyway. In other words, when you see the Pri Chodesh says you need a natila, and by the way, the Pri Megadim also says that the Taz supposedly says you need a netila, but it's not so. It doesn't. I don't see anywhere. Nobody, I think, can point anywhere in the Taz that he says you need a netila. But anyway, Pri Megadim says that. But the Pri Chodesh that says netila, he's going along with the shitas that says you don't even need shishim. In other words, the ducha, the sakina with the heat, all you need is a netila. If that's the case, I mean, shishim is not a question, not a problem over here. It's not that he's more machmir. The klipa is not enough. He says netila is all you need. Even if you don't have shishim, you don't even need shishim. Ducha the sakina is definitely, according to them, is not combined with the heat to produce something so powerful as that we say it answers the whole thing. You need netila is sufficient. Okay, now before we go to the Ramah, we need to figure out what did the Mechaber mean when he says keneged mokum asakin. So keneged mokum asakin. Sometimes people like to take the Rambam's words apart, Rashi's words apart. Sometimes it's good because you can sometimes through a diuk, through further analysis, discover what the real kavanah was or some additional details. But here, Pashup Pshat in learning the Mechaber, Keneged Mokum Asakin just means the blade, not the handle. Yeah, but the blade could be a big blade. You really need the whole blade? Or perhaps just the poor part of the blade that touched the meat. It can make a difference. Do we have Shishu Keneged the whole blade, or do we have Shishu Keneged just that part that touched the meat? It could be a thin slice of meat, not necessarily a thick piece of meat, and therefore not even the whole depth or height, I should say, of the knife even went down. This could make a difference.
The way we make, you discussed this point, the way we make our knives now, but
that's correct.
do we do that literally?
No, we don't. Yeah, that I think is we can understand for the Mechaber that we don't need to include anything that's in the handle. But that's a good question for another reason, as we will soon see. That there may be an opinion that perhaps would say yes. Oh, very good. Yeah. Maybe. Even though it's in the recesses of the handle.
Depends also on that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Here, after all, we're dealing with heat. And as Ilan pointed out, we've learned before a concept called chamit soser cham kuloi. That if the edge of a piece of metal is hot, that heat travels throughout the piece of metal. You see it on the blech, you see it when you use metal. You can't just, unless it's a very long piece of metal, perhaps, depending also on how hot it is, heat travels, or meat or metal conducts heat. That's what Cham Miktzos Cham Kula means. And this Cham Miktzos Cham Kula can make a difference because one part becomes also the whole thing becomes also perhaps because of that. So that relates to this question of how much of the sakin that is cutting the knife do we have to be meshayar against? We need shishim here. So the poskim discuss it. Rabbeinu Peretz easily we know what he holds because he would be going leshitosai. If you remember his shita in Sif Aleph of this Siman, with the calf sticking in a spoon into a seer, into a pot, he says you got to be meshayar connected the whole spoon that went inside. This Cham Miktzos Cham Kula. Now those Cham Miktzos Cham Kula basically says the whole thing is hot, the whole thing absorbs. Even though you put only a piece of it. I agree you put only a piece of it. Yeah. Stuck a little bit of it. No? The whole thing is to be considered. So the Rabbeinu Peretz we would understand because he would hold what he holds in Sif Aleph. But what about the Mechaber? Well, what did the Mechaber tell us in Sif Aleph? Then in the first opinion, he brings down the next. So in the first opinion, he just says, you put in only a little bit of it. That's what you figure. You only cut, and you know how much you cut, right? That's enough. So that's what the Beis Yosef pretty much explains, I believe. And that's how he would hold over here too. Now, what happens, according to the Shittas who want to be machmir here, and we're dealing with a situation that the guy says, listen, I know for sure, because if you don't know, you don't know. You have to mishai the whole thing. But what happens if the guy says, I know for sure until where I cut, till what part of the knife, or how much of the knife. I know how I cut. I didn't use the whole blade. I definitely didn't use the whole height of the blade. What if he knows? Do we rely on him? Those who want to be machmir, of course. Those who want to be machmir. But he knows. Does that make a difference?
You can't rely on that. If you want to be machmir.
So there's a famous Rashal. I don't know if it's only his explanation or his opinion. I mean, it's not just his opinion because the Gemara speaks about it. Milsa de lo ramye le'inish. Something that you do not tell a person, do you not make him aware of it. Be careful. By the way, when you do this, look out for this. Something that an individual will end up doing that he was not aware that his ma'aseh will make a difference. He doesn't pay attention. When you tell somebody, by the way, when you drive, look out on your right. There will be a sign, whatever, saying so and so. Okay, he's expecting it. If somebody is not expecting something, he wasn't told to look out for it. I saw it. How do we know to believe him? He says, no. If you don't expect it, you cannot know with certainty how much of the sakin was used. How could you come and say, I know exactly? Whoever told you to look out for it? How many of you look out how much of the sakin is used?
If there's some markings on the sakin?
If it's concluded.
No. For example, if you cut something greased on the sakin,
I guess that would be some indicator. Yeah, but possibly. That's a good.
You didn't rely on you wouldn't rely on him. You rely on the sakin.
Yeah, that's more of an indicator. Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. What if you have something left over? Yeah. If you can be sure about it.
No,
if you can be sure about it, yes. There is enough rayas from other poskim that if there's a certain degree of certainty, you can rely on that. Here we're just questioning how much we can rely on his opinion or thought. He says, based on my observation. Yeah, but how would you have observed if you didn't know that this would make sense?
You asked if you saw the cow drinking milk.
Oh.
If he says yes, you know that's why.
Yeah, all right. So anyway, the Shach says you can. The Shach holds that you can rely on him. The Shach says clearly you can rely on somebody who says, I know this is how much I used of the knife. But the Pri Megadim, the Pri Chodesh, I believe, are machmir like the Rashal. The Rashal is the one that he says, no way, we don't rely on something like that. All right. So, of course, a sakin ben yoima is where the big trouble is. If it's a sakin she'ena ben yoima, we said that the Mechaber says that all you need is kedei klipa. Why? So if you look at Rabbeinu Peretz brings down that when somebody cuts a piece of meat of the sakin she'eino ben yoimon, we still have to concern ourselves with the shamnunis on top of the sakin. Even though you're right, the tam is pogum by now, the tam that's inside, that's balua, is pogum. When we learned about tam pogum, if you can recall from Taaruvot, we said that's as long as there's no Isser Be'ain. There's nothing on the Keli of Be'ain. Once you have something Be'ain, there's left over, it was not cleansed properly, the pot is still dirty. I don't care if it's 48 hours old. Did we make a distinction?
I think we said it different. What we said was,
right,
if there is a Be'ain of Binyoma is not sufficient to forgive. But of course, if it's something that adds a bad taste to the mix.
Well, yeah, of course. That's the different kinds of it. No, we're talking about the Be'ain does not become pogum after 24 hours.
Exactly.
But I think it does become pogum after several weeks, months.
Which type of food?
I already forget. Yeah.
And the question is it a person eat it? There's something
Yeah. But anyway, within a few days, you still have some residue on it that it's not called a tam pogum because it's not ben yoimo. The residue is there. The residue is not pogum, unless the fact is that it's pogum.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So Rabbeinu Peretz, in explaining why you need a klipa anyway, if it's an enemy, just says because we're dealing with shamnunis al gabe asakin. The Shachin Tas somehow write that, by the way, if you know the shamnunis and the sakin, you need shishim keneged the shamnunis too. Not everybody seems to go along with that, but they say you would need shishim keneged the shamnunis. I guess you would have to have some detectable shamnunis, because we were talking about situations where that shamnunis is not detectable, but I figure there is some shamnunis. They seem to be saying you need shishim keneged the shamnunis. What shamnunis? Shamnunis that you probably could observe. You could, no?
It's number one, so they would be holding that spread it.
Right.
It's interesting that they wouldn't. Could they?
No, they still require a klipa. Klipa would be sufficient.
What do you mean by the shamnun?
Right. Yeah.
Now, if they rely on it spreading,
right,
they don't expect that it may have just. Even though we're not talking about a skillet pot.
Right. They say besides the klipa, which they always hold, regardless of it's yom or in addition.
No, but the klipa they need because of the knife.
Well, because maybe it went. Remember the chashash that it went in a little bit.
Wouldn't they require the klipa? Oh, they require that's an eno benyon we're talking about.
We're talking about eno benyon. Yeah.
Okay.
So you need shishim keneged the shamnunis, but all right.
But they could klipa because maybe it concentrates klipa.
Yeah, that's only a chumrah. But obviously, it's more of a chumrah when it's a ben yoima. Ben yoima, I can understand that you may want to remove a klipa because it may have concentrated there. But why would you require it if it's a eno ben yoima? So one pshat is, this is the only simple pshat that you can say by eno ben yoima is because there is shamnunis and shamnunis is be'ain. So it's nothing to do with the blia of the sakin. The Bach says all you need is a klipa here. He's very clear about it, that there's no shishim keneged shamnunis. All you have to consider is a klipa. Now, I think that this is amazing. I think it's important to bring it out. Not everybody learns the Aruch HaShulchan. As I said before, he comes up with interesting ideas and explanations. There's a lot of he puts a lot of clarity, but sometimes it's lacking, unfortunately. So he says, wait a minute, don't forget. And if you're a poisek or if you're a rav that you have to make this resolution, you don't just want to throw stuff in the garbage. You don't want to have Jews spend more money than they should. This is his language.
Right.
And therefore, keep in mind the following. A Melicha knife does not exist. There's no such a thing as a Melicha knife. He says, why? When was the last time he says that you saw somebody sticking a knife in hot, boiling milk? Most knives that we claim are Melicha have been used with butter or cheese.
So it's cold.
Cold. Therefore, they don't even have a dinner status of a Melicha knife.
But shamnunis the knife.
It's not the blias. We're talking about the blias.
Ah.
Blias.
Because
of blias, yeah. You don't really have a Melicha knife.
Milk and baby,
Well, yeah, obviously. But would you use a knife with yogurt? I mean,
No, in case they want to
how are you going to cut the yogurt? Yeah,
once it's cooled down.
hold on, yeah. You use our Melicha knives. We call them Melichas. They are used to cut cheese,
Yeah.
or with butter,
Or yogurt would like to eat this after it's cooled down. So
Yeah.
That's all.
or something soft. Yeah. I say something soft because we will soon see in the Ramah not in the words of the Ramah, but it could make a difference what you cut if it's cold or not as hot. Is it a davar kosher or a davar rak legabe how to be mafsher now the sakin? Not so much as to the food itself, but regarding whether ne'itza bekarka will be sufficient or not. Yeah, okay. So, very important idea the Aruch HaShulchan is saying here, hey, you never really have a Melicha knife. So therefore...
You might have spoon, you might have, but not a knife.
Yeah.
And by fork and spoon, what you speak about Duchte de Sakina also by a fork because of its sharpness of the edges? No?
I don't think so. No.
Push it inside of food?
No, we don't see that. I guess it doesn't have that effect of the blade, of the sakin, of the... Yeah. So the Aruch HaShulchan basically says that the sakin does not have din of a sakin choleves, and all you need is a klipa. You don't need shishim.
But that's interesting because then he is assuming the shim have something to do with the bleed. Because with respect to the shamnune...
Remind me, I want to check it again inside. But go ahead, yeah.
Because with respect to... It doesn't help me that it was used with...
Right, so if you have real shamnune...
So he's the necessary because of bliya, not because of
the bliyas, yeah. Which is what the real which is part of what the problem is here. The bliyas in the beginning, duchka de sakina with Basar Seach. Right. So therefore, now the reason why he brings it, I still want to check it inside one more time. But if I recall, the reason why he says this is because we will soon see in the Ramah that this whole seif, this whole din in seif, the mechaber's words are assuming we're dealing with kli rishon heat. Okay. Then after that, if you begin to talk about klisheni or tzoinen, which the Ramah does not talk about, things change. So therefore, I think on that the Aruch HaShulchan says, well, the sakin itself also should have been used in a kli rishon, and it probably was not. It probably was never. Therefore, don't just throw away people's food and don't just ask for people's food just like that, because these are the facts. And if it was not, that means it never really became a kli choleves. All you need is a klipa. Why? Shamnunis or whatever. That's all.
No, but even the knife acquired the sham is cold.
Not according to the first hezber in the shach. Remember, the first hezber in the shach is you have a combination of ducha, the sakina, and basar, and the heat.
Right, but once you have some
if you do
and
have,
you have heat in the basar, it's a little bit of a problem.
Yeah. According to the other hezberim, yes. Yeah.
So I'm saying, Aruch HaShulchan doesn't follow that.
Yeah.
The other hezberim.
But in that case, you could rely on the poskim who say that if you know the knife was clean, no shamnunis either, you would need a klipa.
It would be a klipa.
I mean, a klipa, yes. A klipa is a chumrah.
No more than that.
Not more than that. We have quite a few that said kedei netila. I mean, they don't hold to the ducha, the sakina with the heat. Remember the Rash with the Raivat. So it's something to consider when you're dealing with a hefsed maruba for sure. Okay. What about the sakin itself? What do we do with the sakin? Sakin she'eno ben yoimoy. Sakin ben yoimoy that cut through a hot piece of meat. The discussion in RCE requires hagala. Okay? Basar roseach, hot piece of meat, right? When we say hot, by the way, we mean at least yatzor ledis. That's what we usually mean. So that's the assumption here. Ben yoimon, no question about it. How do I know it's hagala? If it asers the whole meat, the knife too is asered. Obviously, that's how you know. So the question is, what about the sakin she'eno ben yoimon? So this brings to mind the situation where you have sometimes a keli that has absorbed two tamim,
right.
basar and chalav.
Atu.
Not atu. In other words, it's one of them is eino ben yoimoy, and one is ben yoimoy. So it's not a basar b'chalav situation, right?
Right. It's not a hanan.
It's not a hanan. It's just it has the blias of both. So the shach says, in that case, if the sakin was not ben yoimoy, you don't need hagola.
Are we talking about an eino ben yoimoy?
We both. In Bechaber, we have both situations. So in the first situation of Ben Yoima, I can understand the sakin needs hagala. You use the spoon, that's Ben Yoima, a milk spoon or a fleishik spoon in your coffee. Your coffee is pretty hot, hopefully. Otherwise, it doesn't pay for you to drink it. You remember the case with a woman sued Starbucks? You know, it was too hot.
But I also know all these cold coffee drinks that they
Yeah.
are selling.
Anyway, so yeah, I guess al tam verech nitvakeach when
You
it
should
comes.
see what's going on by coffee when they
Yeah.
have sometimes these 3 small, whatever
Yeah.
expensive
Right.
cold coffee thing.
Right.
The place is full.
Is that right?
Sometimes I have to work there at the time.
Yeah.
It's standing room only. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And everyone from the
Yeah.
everyone from
If it's
the girls.
So sakin she'eno ben yomo.
Do you need still, if it's anal being normal?
No, so it's eno ben yomo. It's still the knife still has some strength when it's cutting, but it's not ben yomo. So we're not going to be machmir to say the whole piece of meat is asur unless you have shishim in the meat. It's eno ben yomo, so you only need to take off is a klipa. In speaking about a klipa, my wife just asked me a question today. You know, she was in the market with my parents buying, and they saw some fish, carp and salmon, that of course had the scales on it, I'm assuming. Otherwise you can't buy, remember, fish from a goy, even if he tells you it's salmon. We don't trust the goy for that. You see it's a kosher fish, and my wife says, you know, oh, I don't want to buy it. I don't want to buy it because look at all the shrimp, look at all the treif stuff here. He's using the knife for the same thing. He's using the same board, the same knife. I just don't feel good about it. And she said, I told her, what's the problem? You know, I understand that you don't feel good about it. Okay, don't buy it. But me'ikar din, if you ask a shaila, the halacha is you're allowed to buy it even though he used his knife, his treif knife, that he used for octopus, oysters, and crab.
How about shellfish?
Yeah. He used it for everything. It's cold. Elamai, you would need to cut a sliver of the fish at the edge of where the knife cut. A sliver, a klipa, in the tila. Or the meshafshef, or rub it, you know, very well with water. Where the place is. That's it. It's good enough. It's cold. It's cold.
Supermarket.
Right.
This is right.
Right.
And they sell you, they don't sell, and they sell you the sign.
You can't buy it
You can't buy it.
unless you see the scales on it yourself. You have to recognize, identify this as a kosher fish.
Because I have noticed research. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The salmon and dogfish are, there's something called dogfish. I don't
That's
know what
correct. Yeah.
And they are similar.
Of course, there are quite there's
They
several.
are exactly similar,
I-
and they can switch them together.
Exactly.
And no one
See?
can see that
See? I didn't even
Which
think
is
about
more
that.
expensive?
they are the same.
Same price.
Yeah, I would.
Maybe
So why don't they
salmon is
switch?
more expensive.
I don't know. Yeah,
But
depends
they,
which
I
salmon it is.
googled it,
Yeah.
and they look exactly the same.
Wow. Yeah.
But it doesn't happen. So
Yeah, but he's saying that if you don't have the scales,
Oh,
people can get
you
mixed
remove the
up.
scales.
That's why you
And
don't
then
want to
the sign
rely
will
on the
say,
goy. Yeah.
salmon, but
Right. So anyway, so if the sakin is not ben yoimo, the shach writes that it doesn't require hagala. It has blias of the two, but it doesn't require hagala. What does that mean? How am I going to use it? You can't use it for basar or for chalab, as we've learned before. He says, yeah, but you can use it to cut your cake. You can use it for other things if you really want to.
apparently it's not a taco.
No, right.
Except custom.
Right. Yeah.
When we make
Anyway, the
these
Prima
examples-
Godim, by the way, the Prima Godim brings down that is only me'ikar adin. The minig is not to use that knife for anything.
Right.
We follow that minig. When something has blias of basar and chalab, it's a minig. The minig is we're machmir. We just don't use it for anything until we make a gala to it. Even though me'ikar adin you're allowed to for other things, the minig is not to. That's important to remember. That's our minig. Yeah.
You mean now Havela not the eat? It has to be Havela Dafka for anything?
Yeah, we're going to see when the Eitzah works.
Ah.
We haven't seen that yet. That's in the Ramah.
when
Yeah.
you're going to do it, and
Right.
you, let's say go this big aluminum foil and boil the water in there.
Yes,
and
yes.
Put it in a,
Yeah, you can take a big pot in your kitchen, bring the water to a boil, you see the bubbles, and stick in the spoons, the forks, the knives, for a couple seconds and take it out. That's Hagala, yeah.
But do the hagala, let's say the fleshik, and you use the fleshik pot to do it, the hagala with it, or...
First of all, you want to if you're going to use a fleshik, you want to use a kli that was not ben yoima. If you're talking with something melechik, okay?
Yeah, I thought he was talking about a flashing spoon.
Well,
Just,
yeah.
how about getting just
If it's a
aluminum
fleshik spoon that absorbs melechiks,
Right.
right, you can do it in any keli you want as long as it's not a ben yoima. That's the lemaisa.
Which one is the not a bingo? The spoon and the pot?
The keli that is where you're making the hagala.
Yeah, it's the pot,
Yeah,
not the spoon.
not the spoon.
How about the spoon? Should also be a no bingo.
Oh, you mean when you're doing hagala?
Right.
That's correct too. When you do hagala, that spoon should not be ben yoima either.
So both of them should be.
Yes, yeah. So it doesn't really make a difference, but obviously there may be a preference sometimes depending on the situation, which one is the ben yoima. Then you want to do it the same as the one that's the ben yoima, maybe perhaps. Okay, yeah, sure, mechumra, but there's no real chiluk. So the Shach says, therefore, doesn't require hagala. And mikar din, you could use it for other food items. Yeah, because of the napanat, and anyway we do it. It's ein ben yoima.
No, if it's an yes, but
yeah, right. As it is, we don't do it ben yoima. Okay, so now that we saw more or less the various chulukim that would apply to the mechaber's words, let's see the Ramah inside. All of this was said legabe meat that's boiling hot or kli rishon type. If the sakin was ben yoimor, ve'ein shishim babosin, there was no shishim in the meat. Neged hasakin, akol osur. Everything would be osur. Ve'af hasakin tzorech hagala, right? In the case of it's ben yoimor. Aval imhu kli sheni. What happens if you took out a piece of meat and you put it into a plate? Which is what we most of the time do to cut. So that meat is now in a kli sheni. Is the meat called kli sheni? If it's in a plate, that's a kli sheni?
if it's a davar gush.
Oh.
How long it's off the fire?
Not so much how long it's been off the fire. There is a shita, there is a shal again, that holds that a davar gush, and this is important for Hilchos Shabbos too, anything that is solid, a hot potato, a shalom potato, just because you put it on the plate does not render that hot meat or hot potato a kli sheni, a heat of kli sheni. Liquids that are transferred from point 1 to point 2 are cooled off. There are shitas who hold that solids that are transferred to another pot or dish did not lose their heat right away. Right away. Yeah. So he says, if this meat, Ramah says, if this meat is in a kli sheni, habasar tzorich klipa ve'asakin, and the knife doesn't need hagala. We're talking about ben yomer right now. A sakin ne'itza bekarka. Put it in the ground. What's this ne'itza bekarka, by the way? What does ne'itza bekarka do?
Before we come to the bekarka,
right.
Quick question about the davar.
Right.
Are we saying, obviously, if the davar gush came off the fire, the temperature sank below yes, so then you don't have a problem with it even if davar gush came off the fire.
That's correct.
So we're talking about while it's still yes.
Yes.
So just to refresh my memory, then it means that if I'm talking about liquid that's yatsolidus, I need to have a comparable situation.
Sure.
Liquid that's yatsolidus, when you took the sheni, already it's called doesn't cook anymore.
That's
but
correct.
Solid that's yatsolidus,
it retains the heat much more.
So that's still called cooking.
It's still called cooking. Yeah.
But both of them intrinsically have a heat of yatsolidus.
Yes,
one
that's
is
correct.
a liquid, the other is
one
solid.
apparently is maybe more concentrated. The heat
Right.
is properly has more of an effect. According to that shita, yeah, it doesn't lose its heat as fast
in the walls of the
walls, yeah, and therefore you can't rely on the fact that kli sheni eno mevasher, even though you may hold kli sheni mevasher, but if it's a solid,
it itself is a kli sheni.
Yeah, it continues to be a kli rishon. Yeah. So what's this ne'itza bekarka? It's a very interesting idea that is mentioned several times in halacha, that the sakin, you don't sometimes need hagala, but all you need is stick it in the ground a few times. What does that do, and what is that for? The idea of the ne'itza bekarka is just to remove shamnunis. The rough ground, what it does, it has the effect of removing, it does a good job of removing the shamnunis of the sakin. Yeah. Ajax, or is it the...
about the powder.
Or is it more like the metal, what do you call that metal?
Steel wool.
Steel wool, or whatever.
Steel wool.
Yeah, well. Right.
Steel wool is powerful.
Yeah. It has that, it's hard ground, not soft ground. Hard ground.
So not like in our backyard.
Well, it depends which backyard. A lot of these backyards have clay. A lot of clay. It's not soft at all. Try to dig it, it's going to be very difficult. So sakin needs to be karka in a kli sheni situation. That's the minay vafilu ein sakin ben yoimoy. Yesh liklof abasar. He says, by the way, even if the sakin is not ben yoimoy, go ahead and take off a klipa me'at. Why? Mishum shamnunis sakin. Brings it down the tour. Beis Yosef b'shem smak. You always want to take off a klipa. You use the Melicha knife on flesh. Still, and even though it's not ben yoimoy, you want to always take off a klipa. Now, according to the Rashal, who holds that a davar gush, even in a kli sheni, is like a kli rishon, that sakin you would not go through the ne'itza bekarka. If he holds that the solid piece of meat is like a kli rishon, then obviously he would require hagala for the sakin too. If it's ben yoima we're talking about. Now, interesting taz. Very interesting. It's a long taz, if you ever have the time. Interesting. The taz says, let's not forget for a moment. Yes, I know all the dinim about kli sheni, whether you learned it from Taaruvot or in Hilchos Shabbos, the kli sheni is not mevashel. Some say it's mavliya, but it's or maflit. It doesn't do both. There are various shittas in kli sheni. The taz says, but wait a minute. Don't just rush to conclude that because it's a kli sheni, the halacha changes of it. The taz wants to be machmir here and says, since we're dealing with a duchka de sakina with a kli sheni, the halacha is different. That's what the taz wants to be machmir here. Kli sheni with duchka de sakina, it's mavliya and the whole basar. Very interesting.
When you think the basar is a davar gush.
Yeah, but besides the davar gush.
But it's cold now.
No, we didn't get to cold. We're talking about roseach, but it's kli sheni. I'm continuing on with the Ramah. The basar is kli sheni instead of kli rishon. It's still hot. The taz says, yeah, it's kli sheni.
But it's less than yatzolid.
No. It makes no difference. It's at least yatzoled as well. I should say it's at least yatzoled as well.
So what is the...
It's a kli sheni. The Ramah's din. Ramah was Mekel, the Taz wants to be Machmer. Mm-hmm. Even though the Taz was a different generation, but he can be Machmer. Yeah, especially if you go with the Rashal. But he's not necessarily going with the Rashal, that it's a double gush. He's saying, listen, I know all about kli sheni, but let's not forget that we're dealing with a knife here. A knife with a kli sheni? It should be the same. The Taz wants to be Machmer. There's a lot of poskim, I believe, Achronim, I don't remember all the names, who go along with him. It's mavliya b'chol basar. Now, as far as the klipa that is required here, the Torah's Chata says a klipa is always required, even me'ikar adin. But Rekiva Eger, the Gro, I believe, also say that it's not me'ikar adin. Towards the end of the Ramah, even if it was the sakin is not ben yom yeshliklov, it says that's just because of shanunis, like he mentions himself. By kli sheni, you shouldn't really need a klipa. But anyway, the poskim write on this last chumrah that if you know for sure that your knife was completely clean, you don't even need a klipa. I think they write it in the last din over here by kli sheni. Okay, so what do we do with a cold piece of meat? So this is not brought down over here, but the Darkei Moshe brings it down, and he brings it down in the name of the Isa Beheter, that even if it's a cold piece of meat, you need a klipa. Why? Again, because of Shamnunis. Chachmas Adam brings down Halacha L'maaseh that you should it's correct to take up a klipa. He says it's correct. Nochon hadovar likloif, he says, but minadin sagi behadocha uveshifshuf heitev, he said. If you rub it well, scrub it, or you rinse it out well, like I told you with the fish, that should be enough. So, what happens if somebody by mistake was served a piece of meat on his plate with vegetables and mashed potatoes and everything, and he takes out the knife and begins to cut? Oh no, why'd you put me a Melicha knife over here? It can happen. You know, the halacha is that we distinguish between cutlery, either in color or in shape, so these things shouldn't happen. You know, on the things I've seen people put chalavi, basari, usually the right and the left, colors, some Melicha is blue, fleshik is orange. People make this distinction, so these kind of mistakes should not happen. That's the right thing to do. Even with salt shakers, you have fleshiks and you have melichiks. I tell people that when it comes to Shabbos, I have a new pair of shoes, I have a different pair of shoes, I have a different belt, if I need one, a different yarmulke. Everything is different hat. Shabbos, I change everything. The covered Shabbos. How could you wear what you wear during the week for Shabbos? Everything is separate and different for Shabbos. Not only is it clean, it's separate. Just the covered Shabbos. So I'm saying the two cases are very different, but same thing in Melicha and Fleshik, just not to make the mistake. You want it to be very different. You want it not to be the same so that it shouldn't come to a mistake. Even though with salt and pepper shakers, it's not such a big chumrah because all you're doing is shaking. But there may, as we learned, there may be something left. Yeah, something on the shaker. So you want to avoid that. That's all. Do you need a separate placemat? Do you? Well, you have a glass table. You can eat on the glass table. No problem. You don't need a placemat. You really don't need a placemat. The glass table is glass. The plate is not hot enough. And that's why even in Hilchos Pesach, when people are kashering their countertops, if you never put very, very hot items on those countertops, you don't have a problem. With formica, of course, it's more of an issue, but you wouldn't want to put something very hot on formica because you'd ruin formica. So they have little things that you put on top. So it's only Pesach where it's an extra chumrah to really cleanse the kitchen well from A to Z. Non-porous material is not a problem. You clean it up, you clean it well, and you're done with it. So do you need placemats? You really don't need to have placemats. It's better, more, it's cleaner. You don't get any stuff on the table. You don't have to clean it up later. And in this way, we are trained to separate everything.
I thought it was also intended.
Visual?
Yeah, visual. So that now you're.
Yeah, it could be. Either way, it's just a matter of.
So you don't bring the meat cutlery out.
Yeah.
Now everyone's eating those.
Yeah, it's not Ikar din so much a necessity, but obviously it's better, especially if two people are eating at the same table, as we've already covered. One is having his pizza, one is having his steak. They should, of course, have some separation, not only in distance between them, not share the same, knives for sure, but even the jar of water, perhaps. Some say a jar is a separation itself. Yes, but not if you're going to both be drinking from it.
Who says that? So the Shasman said it explicitly.
Yeah. What about putting a nice flower pot in between? Make it romantic. Anyway, you see, because it can happen. You eat the same bread? No, you're not going to eat from the same bread. You're going to separate them completely. So here too, in order not to come to this problem, you definitely want to make a separation between the cutlery and so that you can identify it, that the two are different. So as far as the sakin, even if it was not a ben yoimoy, you would want to kasher it. Okay, that's how we hold. The only thing is that if it's with a kli sheni, you don't really have to worry about kashering it any time. By sakin, there's a special din of ne'itza bekarka. So that's the one kula that you can have basically almost according to everybody, except for if it's...
No, but you just finished saying that the karka helps with the shomnus.
Right.
What about the belia?
No, so I'm saying even the blia.
So the Yitzhak karka even helps with the belia?
The problem here is, it's not so much the blia, it's the shanunis that's coming off with the ne'itza. The advice to use ne'itza, or the recommendation just that the ne'itza works, is because we're dealing with a kli sheni. So therefore, you got some kli sheni shanunis on this knife. It's not the shanunis that was there before. Not the Melicha shanunis. The ne'itza b'karka, what does it accomplish? It removes what you've just cut through.
Is that for
the flesh. You're not eliminating.
But this knife was not boleya.
It was not boleya through a kli sheni. Therefore, you don't really need hagala. Ne'itza b'karka is sufficient. No. So that's what I'm saying. According to those who hold davar gush makes a big difference, then you would always need hagala.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, put away that shita for a moment. The sakin.
So according to the Ramah.
The sakin, regardless, if we're dealing with a kli sheni situation, right? You don't need hagala. That's what he says over here. He says, "Calls the basar roiseh avekli rishon." So as in sakin ben yoimo, then it makes a difference, right? Also, but if it's a kli sheni, a basar tzorich klipo, v'sakin ne'itza bekarka. V'chenoigim v'afilo ein sakin ben yoimo yesh liklof habasar. So that's like he's machmir on the basar, even if the sakin is not ben yoimo. So what I'm saying is, what I'm adding here is apparently. Ne'isa b'karka would go either way, because if the ne'isa is to remove the shanunis of the basar, it doesn't make a difference if the sakin is a ben yoim or not. You're getting rid of that fat from the meat, not the fat that was there, perhaps from the milk. You just cut it. You just cut meat, but it's a kli sheni. Okay, you don't really need anything more than ne'isa b'karka. That's all. That's all. That's all he's saying. That's where the leniency of a kli sheni is. He holds anyway that you're going to take off a klipa even if it's not a ben yoimo, because of the shanunis of the sakin. So that's the gabe the meat itself.
So it makes a difference when it's the second or the you're cutting?
Yeah, because that's the gabe the din of the sakin. What do you do with the sakin? I have shanunis of the basar, right? That I want to remove. I don't need to make hagala to it. Yeah, but I got all this meat on it. Yeah, Stick it a few times in the ground, and you're done with that shanunis of the basar. So sometimes, when you have no other way to make hagala, it's important to realize that if our situation involves a kli sheni, which many times it is, you don't need to go take hagala if you want to continue to use this knife for milk. Right? Yeah. Right. Right.
Can the couple the same thing if you had left one in and left the
No. The way it works is by putting it several times in the ground, up to 10 times in the ground, and some say in different spots on the ground, not even in the same spot.
So if
Yeah,
you
because
said
after
for
the first
solid,
handle,
there's
it
no
is soft.
real
Yeah,
change.
right?
If
Exactly.
you said for basar,
Right.
or for solid things, there's no.
So then they would require hagala,
Then there is no need.
especially if it was a ben yoima. If it's not a ben yoima, you could be meko. So remember, sometimes you have that combination of the sakin was not used for a while. The Aruch HaShulchan, remember what he said, the sakin, the chalal, it's not even a real milchik at the sakin. What did you use it for? To cut a few pieces of slices of cheese, right? But as you pointed out before, there may be times where you may have used it to cut through a hot pizza or something. So actually, there may be, but even then, it will most surely be eino ben yoima. So that's always a help, an assist in evaluating the situation. That at the very least, I don't need shishim. I can get away with a klipa just because of that alone. And as far as the sakin, well, if you use it without, well, you can do agala. It's not a big deal. But you may not have to, if it was because you're dealing with a klisheni that you're cutting right now. Oh, yeah, it's true. I used it for pizza. Yeah. I used it for hot milk. Yeah, but what did you cut now? It's a piece of meat that's already cooled off a little bit. It's in the klisheni. Oh, okay. Go ahead and be machmir if you want to. You can do hagala to it. Hagala is not hard on a knife. Hagala could be difficult if you have pots and pans and things like that. But if you have a few utensils that from time to time became treif, even if it's not a real treif because one of the tamim is an eino ben yoima and one blia is a ben yoima, it's not a real treif basar b'chol situation. Nonetheless, you want to make hagala to it, like our minig is to do. Yes.
I have one question.
Sure.
If you have a set of dishes,
Right.
but you want to do a hagala right before,
Okay.
and you do not have a giant pot to take a pot,
Sure.
put that pot into the giant pot to do
Then you can do hagala on that pot itself. There's a special way to do it on how you make the water go up to the top by putting in the hot brick inside and letting it overflow.
Yeah, that's if you have another pot that.
You first make hagala to that pot, a big pot, right?
And then rotate it.
And then put in other pots. Yeah, just like Elam pointed out before. Usually, when we do any form of hagala, we do it when the keli is eino ben yoima already. So like this, it's eino ben yoima. It's not barnat. You're always safer this way.
So that second pot, boiling pot, all the way with it.
No, if it doesn't fit, then you can't do it. You have to do hagala in it.
In it.
You have a lot of big pots that don't fit into another pot.
Right.
So you have to make hagala in that pot by filling it up with water to the top.
Every one of them.
If it doesn't fit, that's correct. Yeah, that's why some caterers have very, very large pots so they can fit everything. If not, then you have to boil the water in that pot to make a gala to it, right? Because you don't want to stick it in the oven. You're going to burn. You're going to melt the handle, right? I mean, that would be another way to get to that kind of heat. And you want to use the same kind of heat, ideally, that it was used with to begin with. Water with water, oven with heat. Yeah.
If you have those sets only Pesach, you need to do a hagala with it.
No.
On what?
Today we buy a lot of dishes, especially for Pesach. Hagala is only intended in the old days, especially people couldn't afford to buy new kelim, or they don't have the specific kind of keli that, so they want to make hagala for it. Yeah. If you can afford to buy separate kelim then that's the best way for Pesach. Okay, we'll stop over here.